Hello, Will. In this new interview of Vaping It's Not Smoking campaign, I'm pleased to say that I have one of the most, if not the most important researcher in what matters to science about vaping. I'm pleased to say that we have with us Dr. Constantino Farsalinos. He's from Greece. He's a cardiologist, MD, MPH, specialized in tomography and smoking harm reductions research, and one of the most renowned researchers in the area. Thanks to be with us.
Thank you.
You have been conducting a lot of laboratory, clinical, and epidemiological research in what have to do with vaping. And you are one of the scientists that have rejected a lot of the studies from that attacks vaping.
Yes.
Can you tell me or tell to our audience how you get involved in this area?
Yeah, it started as a coincidence. It started from two friends of mine who were smokers, and I was a smoker also at that time. That was in 2011. And they bought an electronic cigarette and they sent me some photos of them vaping in an effort to quit smoking. So at that time I was completely ignorant concerning vaping and electronic cigarettes. I had no involvement, I didn't know what they were. I was, basically joking with them, and I was telling them, you wasted your money for nothing, and I can prescribe you some varenicline if you want to quit smoking. But by seeing my reaction, they were more persistent, and they were sending me more and more of the photos of themselves, exhaling clouds of vapor. And that generated the idea to have a look at the issue and see what the electronic cigarette is, try to find some established users, vapers in Greece, and there was a vaping forum, online forum at the time, and that's where I became a member and I contacted them. And that's how I started doing my research. And I remind you, I was a smoker at that time. That's how it all started, and it became, a full-time job. But I wanted to comment on your campaign, which is Vaping is Not Smoking. And the unfortunate thing and the problem that we're facing comes from the fact that you had to choose a slogan like this, Vaping is Not Smoking. I would consider that a slogan that would fit in 2010, in 2012, where we didn't have a lot of research. We didn't have a lot of products in the market and people didn't know what that is. But if in 2022 we still need a slogan like that, that means that we have a very, very serious problem of misinformation. And people, after so many years, after hundreds and thousands of studies, they still don't understand that vaping is not smoking. And of course, I don't blame the population, the citizens, the people. It's the level of confusion coming from such a controversial debate, and especially coming from the scientific community. Unfortunately, they should be the ones who would clarify things instead of creating a confusion. But the fact that you had to use a slogan like this, vaping is not smoking, shows how much misinformed people are, how badly they perceive something which definitely, and of course your slogan is absolutely right, is not smoking, and how they confuse a very, very harmful and lethal behavior with something that is by far less harmful, of minimal harm, I would say. That's the truth. And you still need mottos and slogans like that in order to pass your message. It's not working well, and the scientific community is not treating citizens in a fair way in this subject. It's harm reduction. Of course, it's not smoking. Harm reduction is a strategy that we apply daily in our lives. Harm reduction is the use of seat belts. Harm reduction is the use of helmets. Harm reduction is the use of condoms. Why? Because it reduces but does not eliminate harm. Eliminating harm means you will never enter a car. You will never ride a motorcycle. You will never have sex. That's what eliminates risk. So everything else and all aspects of our life is about risk management, and trying to reduce risks as much as possible. When you walk on the streets, you are exposed to risks, but you don't stop walking on the streets, This is what harm reduction is. And these products are harm reduction for smoking. It should have been a very easy concept for everyone to understand. But there are people, especially in the scientific community and in the political and regulatory arena, that don't want people to have a clear understanding of what vaping and other products like that are. And that's why you need such a campaign and such a name in your campaign.
Well, taking your words, actually, vaping and not smoking have been working in the campaign for more than 3 years now over Ibero-America, and we are still fighting on it. Recently in Chile, less than 6 months ago, we were able to finally make the politicians understand that vaping it's not smoking, and they totally get out the word e-cigarette from the tobacco law. And now we are going through a new step that it's telling them how the regulation should be done and how important is harm reduction there. And I must say that in that work, that it's not only the campaign, it's to talk to the politicians, and most of that talks are by myself. I need to say thanks, because in many of my talk with the politicians, Dr. Constantino Farsalinos is on it, especially with your studies. You say it, there is a lot of misinformation, but many of that misinformation, it's coming from
the science. From the scientific community, yeah. And regulators and politicians, they're not experts in every field. They make decisions or they regulate. They are expected to receive the information and to be acquainted with the subject from the experts. So the source of the misinformation is unfortunately the scientific community. It's the tobacco control, as I call it in my lecture this year at GFN, the tobacco control industry, which is a scientific community, of course, which is providing inappropriate guidance to the regulators, not only to the citizens, to the smokers, but also to the regulators. They are influencing them into making bad decisions. So, of course, your motto and your slogan is very much relevant today. It shouldn't have been relevant, but unfortunately, the environment is such that it is relevant. So, I think that you're also having the right strategy of engaging into a debate, especially as consumers. Consumers can never be accused of any interest besides an interest for their health. So it's extremely important to have consumers engaged into a debate with the scientific community, of course, with politicians, with regulators, with everyone, because their saying is very, very strong and it is unbiased and uninfluenced by vested interests.
As you said, misinformation is a problem, and your work, it's like our tools to get those people out of the misinformation. I can remember now your rejection of the study about hard metals in
electronic
cigarettes, yeah. The one that you do with Professor Rodu. Can you tell us some of them, because you have a wide staff, but what you have found?
I wanted to clarify what we did. We didn't reject anything. We just replicated the studies. Some studies with results that we found at the minimum very weird. So science means that when you have a result of an experiment, this result is valid as long as it can be replicated by anyone using the same method, the same tools, the same approach. So what we did is replicate studies. Take the same products, the same devices, the same atomizers, use the same method and conditions of producing aerosol, same puff duration, same puff volume, same power settings, and measure. And there were cases where we found orders of magnitude lower levels of harmful emissions, which meant that something is wrong. In the case of metals that you mentioned, we just made a risk assessment analysis of their own results. We didn't measure anything, but we used what we considered appropriate risk assessment analysis. Why? Because just saying that something is present somewhere means nothing about risk, because the environment, the food we eat, the water we drink is full of something that can be toxic. But toxicity is defined by the amount of exposure. This is an old saying by Paracelsus, who is the father of toxicology, 500 years ago. No, 400 years ago. But it's something well known. So it's the amount of exposure that dictates the toxicity of a compound, of a chemical. So you may have chemicals which are very hazardous, very dangerous, but at levels that don't cause anything. And this can happen with everything, basically. So just by saying that the X, the Y metal is present in the aerosol means nothing. So we didn't even measure anything ourselves. We just took their results, and in fact we took the worst case scenario, so the highest levels that they found, and we made a risk assessment analysis based on environmental safety limits that are already regulated by the EPA or by other organizations in the US, which are considered safe when they are present in the air and you inhale them. And we found, of course, that for almost all metals, the levels present in the e-cigarette aerosol would result in a daily exposure that is 2, 3, 4 orders of magnitude lower than the safety limits. The only thing that was quite close to the safety limits was, if I remember well, nickel, which again, taking the worst result, it was something like 10 or 15 times lower than the recommended safety limit by US organizations. So, you can easily create fear by just mentioning some names of chemicals, metals, or whatever. But if you don't provide the context, the true context, which means what does this number mean when you get exposed daily? What does this number mean compared to safety limits? You're not giving information, you're misinforming. So that was a case where we didn't even replicate anything. We said, okay, you measured them and everything is right. But let's see what do these measurements mean in terms of risk. And we did the risk assessment analysis that you mentioned with Professor Braderodu.
In your experience, you have a wide experience in this aspect. What are the most shocking false stuff that you have found in other studies? I'm thinking in cases like the study of, forget the name, Stanton glands.
Yeah.
Stanton glands.
With the heart attacks, you
mean?
Yeah.
You can talk about that one, but also what other stuff that you face it was like, oh my God, this is so wrong.
I think we've seen wrongdoings and research that has been either done wrongly or being interpreted in the wrong way in all basically aspects of e-cigarette research. From chemistry studies, we've seen studies which were grossly wrong. I mean, the results, what they're reporting was wrong. We've seen chemistry studies where the patterns of vaping were completely wrong. They were taking a very primitive device and they were using something like 60, 70, 80 watts, which is impossible, so completely unrealistic conditions. It's like saying that bread is carcinogenic, and how did you measure that? I took the bread, I took the flour, I created, prepared everything to be baked. I baked it at 350 degrees for 24 hours, and then I found a piece of coal inside, of course that was not bread, and it's full of carcinogens. So I conclude that bread is carcinogenic. But no, bread is not carcinogenic. The way that you prepared the bread, which ended up in a piece of charcoal and not bread, this is carcinogenic. But that's not the bread that everyone can eat. This is exactly what happened with a lot of chemical studies in electronic cigarettes. That was the case very frequently several years ago. It's been happening even now, even more recently. What we are also seeing is a misinterpretation of findings, for example, the getaway hypothesis, the getaway to smoking hypothesis, that kids who initiate an inhalational habit with vaping, they end up after months or years to try cigarettes too. Well, the getaway hypothesis, I think, is fundamentally wrong. It's not only about vaping, because it doesn't examine and doesn't take into consideration that people who try different, forbidden or risky things are generally prone to and willing to try such things. So people who smoke also like to drink alcohol. It's not that smoking makes them drink alcohol. It's that they want to be engaged into such risky behavior. So there are many different risky behaviors, and these people are more willing to try risky things than someone who doesn't do anything. So if someone starts by drinking a beer, he's more likely to drink also whiskey compared to someone who doesn't drink any alcoholic drink. Well, why? It's not because beer has some mechanism of making you want whiskey. It's because you like alcohol. So you most likely like more than one type of alcohol. This is called a common liability model. And this is what explains use of multiple products and engagement in multiple risk behaviors, like the associations between drinking and smoking, smoking and marijuana use, smoking and drug use, starting with marijuana and ended up with other types of opiates drugs. It's not that there is a mechanism that one product makes you want the other. It's that you like using things like that. So it's much more likely for you that you will progress to something else. This is called common liability. So kids are quite curious to try things. They are rebels, some of them more than others. And those who are curious to try things, of course they are more likely to try electronic cigarettes and tobacco cigarettes. And you know what? They're going to start with something which is easier to find or cheaper to buy, and will end up to using another thing, not necessarily because they don't like the first one, because they like trying things. This is common liability, that's the name. And I think that the common liability model can easily explain all types of use of risky products or of forbidden for youth products like alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, e-cigarettes, or anything other like that. It's much more convincing. There is a lot of evidence proving that the common liability theory is valid. And those people who discuss about getaway to smoking have no idea about common liability or don't want to accept common liability.
I see. And I know this is a difficult question, but why? Why there is people doing this kind of science? People like Stanton Glantz? What do you think it's on the back of that?
In the case of Stanton Glantz, it was not just not accepting a theory. It was basically an intentional effort to present a case, and I think it was intentional because he knew what he was analyzing. That's I'm sure. That he knew because the survey that he was analyzing included a question which addressed the timing of the events. So when you had a health problem and when you initiated vaping. So he knew by having access to the data, to the data set, that people who reported having had a heart attack and reported using electronic cigarettes, most of them had their heart attack before initiating cigarette use. So that's not a matter of interpreting things, it's a matter of hiding the fact that there was a clarification within the survey of the timing of different events, timing of e-cigarette use initiation and timing of having the heart attack. He didn't mention that in the paper, and then he presented the data as if everyone who had a heart attack and vaped started vaping before the heart attack, which was wrong.
Yeah, totally.
And that's why the study was retracted.
What's in Stanton Gland head? Because I don't want to think that Stanton Gland wants to lie the people, so there is more people dying. What do you think it's in the back? Why people, even people from science, lying and taking this information to misinform?
I'm not going to talk specifically about him because I don't know what personally he thinks and why he behaves the way he behaves. But I'm going to give you an overview of what the tobacco control community is doing. And there are many reasons. Some individuals may do it for one reason, some others for something else. But overall, as a community, as an industry, as an organization which contains both individual scientists but also health organizations like the WHO, the CDC, the FDA, all are part of the tobacco control movement. In reality, this is what I presented this year in the Michael Russell oration. It's, I think, the power of authoritarianism that we make the decisions. We know better than anyone else. We're using the past, so you're not so open-minded because you make judgments and conclusions not based on an open-minded approach of researching and seeing what's going to happen, but by looking at the past, using the experience of very different products like tobacco cigarettes, which is completely different. So not being open-minded, having an authoritarian approach that we know better than everyone. We are the sole owners of truth, of morality. We know what is just, what is unjust, what is justice, what is injustice. And we can take the decisions for you because we know better than you about you. This is a very arrogant, as you understand, but also very authoritarian behavior. At the same time, however, they fail to understand and to respect individuality, personality, the unique personality of everyone, the undisputed right of everyone to make informed choices, to take matters of their health in their own hands and decide by themselves. And they're doing that through their, the tobacco control movement is preventing that and is disrespecting all these things because they have a prohibitory agenda. It's not only that they are misinforming people, it's that their goal is to ban these products. Or if not ban, because in some cases it's not even legally possible to ban them, but to make them as unappealing and restrict their access as much as possible so that people will not have access to them. So this prohibitory agenda, in my opinion, is highly unethical. It is based on the theory that they are the sole owners of ethics, the only people who know what we should do and how we should manage this matter, the matter of smoking. And I think it ends up being a strongly philosophical and sociological matter rather than a scientific matter, because the science now, I mean, after so many years, the science is there. It's undisputed when you look at the relative risk. Of course, there are some residual risks. Of course, we need to continue doing the research, but there is no debate on whether it's a higher, equal, or lower risk product compared to smoking. There is no dispute on that.
Talking about debate, now in Latin America, in Chile, in Colombia, in Argentina, in Brazil, we are just in the moment of taking decisions, in different ways, but taking decisions. In Chile, they just divide the waters. Tobacco from one side is cigarettes, but now we're heading for the research, for the legislation yeah. of the regulation of e-cigarettes. If you were willing to send a message for the legislators that now are going through this discussion, what you will tell them?
It should be realistic, and risk proportionate. And in order to be realistic and risk proportionate, it should be, and that's very important what you said that they decided in Chile, it should be very different from the regulation of tobacco cigarettes. If you want to have realistic, pragmatic and risk proportionate regulation for these products, there is such a vast difference in the level of risk that you cannot apply the tobacco regulation for these products. You have to have a separate regulation. So what you said, separating the waters, is exactly the right approach, because that's the only way that you're going to apply the risk proportionate rule, which is crucial, and is what regulators do for everything. You know, you apply heavier restrictions when the risk is higher. You apply lower restrictions or even no restrictions when there is very low or even zero risk. That's common sense. In order to do that with these products, there is such a big difference in the risk profile of these products compared to smoking that it's impossible to use the regulation prepared for the most lethal product and believe that you can prepare the right regulatory framework using this legislation for the least harmful product, which has a huge gap in a huge difference in risk. So we need to have separate regulation, treat them separately, always as consumer products, and apply the risk proportionate principle and not the precautionary better safe than sorry principle, which is highly problematic, because if you want to protect the status quo, and the status quo in all these countries is smoking and tobacco cigarettes, then you should always use the argument of uncertainty. We will never be certain. Let me tell you that even in 100 years, someone is going to tell you, yeah, but in the next 50 years, something else will happen. We will never be absolutely certain, and we are never absolutely certain for anything we do, we use, and we regulate. We don't need to be absolutely certain. But so the precautionary principle cannot be used. Why? For two reasons. First of all, you cannot base everything on uncertainty. And second of all, you already have very high risk in the society because this is a product that addresses smoking. It's not a product that we just want to be introduced as a consumer product for everyone. It has strong, positive public health prospects because it is used as a smoking substitute. So inaction or use of the precautionary principle, abuse of the precautionary principle, is equals to higher risk. Inaction and protection of the status quo is risk that people are facing now and have been facing for many years. So I'm glad to hear that the Chilean government decided to have separate regulation. Now the important thing is that how differently they're going to treat the e-cigarettes compared to tobacco cigarettes, but it's still a very strong positive sign that they realize that they are something different. Because the easiest thing that everyone does is consider them tobacco products based on a legality that if a product contains anything coming from tobacco, it's a tobacco product. And as I wrote in 2014, using this logic, you must consider biodiesel as a vegetable product and sell it in grocery stores because it's coming from plants. But of course, it's not a vegetable product, and of course, it shouldn't be sold in grocery stores. You can't apply such logic. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, not even from a scientific perspective. It's just a legal trick. It shouldn't be used for products like electronic cigarettes.
It's a pity, but the time runs very, very fast. Just the last question to end this interview. Is vaping a smoking?
Well, vaping is not smoking, and it's a pity that you still need to use this slogan, but I congratulate you for using it, because if you want to communicate the truth, You need a simple message and an easy to understand message. And I think it will work in Latin America pretty well.
In name of our campaign, our group that are behind cameras, I want to say thank you for your time, but also as an advocate, I really want to say you really thank you, because you are the one making the tools that we can use to fight misinformation. You are great, and I really appreciate your work.
Thank you, and good luck in your campaign.